The chandeliers sparkled like constellations pinned to a ceiling, their light scattering across polished floors and crystal glasses. The reception hall was alive with voices overlapping in a symphony of congratulations, laughter, and whispered judgment. Every detail had been designed for grandeur. The white roses, the silk-covered chairs, the towering cake positioned at the center like a monument to celebration. It should have been perfect. It should have been mine. But as I sat at the long table dressed in white, veil brushing against my shoulders, a weight pressed down on me heavier than the fabric I wore. When the clinking of utensils against glasses subsided, I saw my parents rise. My pulse quickened. For a fleeting moment, a childlike hope stirred inside me, the kind I thought I had long buried. Maybe, just maybe, they would look at me the way they looked at my sister. Perhaps, on the day meant to celebrate my union, they would remember I was more than a shadow. My hands folded neatly in my lap, a poised smile painted on my face to hide the storm brewing beneath the surface. But their eyes didn't meet mine. Not once. They walked past me as though I were a guest at my own wedding. The murmurs in the crowd softened, a hush of anticipation falling over the room. My father reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box, the kind that carried the weight of history, promise, and pride. My mother, beaming with a radiance reserved only for my sister, opened the box with practiced grace. The room gasped as diamonds caught the light, refracting brilliance in every direction. A necklace, large, undeniable, unmistakably expensive. Together, they clasped it around my younger sister's throat. She tilted her chin high, the gems spilling across her collarbone like liquid fire. Cameras flashed as she posed, smile widening, head tilting at the perfect angle to capture envy. Applause erupted, scattered at first, then growing, as though the crowd itself forgot whose day it was. I sat motionless, the smile on my face stiffening until it threatened to crack. Whispers sliced through the air. They gave her sister diamonds, but nothing for the bride? Even her family doesn't value her. How humiliating. The heat crawled up my neck, staining my cheeks red. My throat felt tight, as though invisible fingers had wrapped around it. My husband, my one ally in this room filled with teeth masked as smiles, slipped his hand under the table, fingers brushing mine in quiet reassurance. But I pulled away, not out of anger, not because I didn't need comfort, but because I didn't want him to feel my trembling. This was a wound too deep, too old, too familiar for him to carry. I lifted my glass, pretending to sip, pretending to remain untouched, pretending something I had been trained to do all my life. The crowd's laughter swirled louder, my sister basking in her spotlight while my parents' eyes gleamed with satisfaction. It was the same story retold, written in different rooms, at different times, but always with me in the margins. And then, just as I thought the humiliation had reached its peak, the atmosphere shifted. From the back of the hall, a figure emerged, a man dressed in a black suit, tailored sharp enough to slice through silk. His steps were measured, his presence commanding, and though no microphone carried his words, silence fell as if the room itself bent to his authority. Heads turned, eyes widened. Recognition rippled through the guests like a wave crashing to shore. It was him, the city's most renowned jeweler, a man whose name was synonymous with wealth, legacy, and pieces that outlived generations. He didn't glance at my sister. He didn't pause at my parents. His gaze found me, steady, unwavering, and in that gaze, something electric shifted in the air. "Ma'am," he said, voice clear, resonant enough to pierce through the chatter. "Your gift is ready. May I present it now?" Gasps echoed against the walls. My parents stiffened, the color draining from their faces. My sister froze, her hand half raised with the diamond necklace, her smile faltering. Conversations died mid-sentence, every guest leaning forward, hungry for the unraveling drama. The jeweler placed a large velvet case on the table before me. My fingers hesitated above it, trembling slightly as the crowd leaned closer. With practiced precision, he opened it, revealing what no one expected. Inside lay a tiara. Not just any tiara, but one so finely crafted it seemed alive under the chandelier's glow. Diamonds sculpted into delicate filigree curved upward like frost-kissed branches, each stone cut with impossible perfection. It wasn't gaudy, it wasn't loud, it was regal. Silent power woven into jewels. A crown in every sense of the word. Gasps rolled through the crowd again, sharper this time. My breath hitched, chest tightening as tears burned the back of my eyes. I didn't move, not yet, waiting for an explanation I hadn't realized I craved. The jeweler looked at me, his voice softer now, almost reverent. This was commissioned years ago by your late grandfather. His instructions were clear. It was to be given to you alone, on your wedding day. He told me, she is the true heir, and she must wear this as her crown. The hall spun. My hands trembled as I reached toward the tiara, touching the cool metal, feeling the weight of more than diamonds. It was validation. It was recognition. It was proof that someone who mattered, had seen me, had believed in me, long before this day. My parents' smiles cracked, their masks slipping into horror. My sister's face twisted, her necklace suddenly appearing cheap beside the tiara. The room, once filled with whispers of pity, now hummed with awe, envy, curiosity. But the jeweler wasn't finished. He reached into his coat and retrieved an envelope sealed with an embossed crest. My grandfather's crest. My breath faltered as I tore it open, the room watching in silence, so absolute it felt sacred. Inside were documents, property deeds, trust fund details, investments spanning years. And beneath them all, a single line in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. Let them laugh at you today, but tomorrow they will bow when they see who you really are. The words carved into me deeper than any wound my parents had ever inflicted. Tears blurred my vision, but my hands were steady as I lifted the tiara and placed it on my head. The weight settled across my crown, grounding me, empowering me. The applause that followed wasn't forced, wasn't for the spectacle, it was for me. For the first time, I stood in the center of my own story. The crowd rose to their feet, voices rising in celebration, the sound of validation I had never received from the people who should have given it first. I met my mother's horrified stare across the room. She looked as though the ground had betrayed her by holding steady beneath her feet. My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. My sister gripped her necklace with white knuckles, her eyes flicking between the tiara on my head and the hollow silence surrounding her applause. The roar of clapping still echoed against the chandeliers when the first ripples of unease began to settle. Applause is never endless. It rises, swells, then dissolves, leaving behind the truth people are too polite to speak aloud. I felt it the second the noise faded and the sound of chairs scraping against polished floors returned. Faces I had known for years were turned toward me with new calculations in their eyes. They weren't just wedding guests anymore. They were witnesses to a scene no one had expected, a revelation that shifted more than the mood of the evening. I stood at the head table, tiara fixed firmly in place, my hands pressed against the velvet box as though anchoring myself. Across the room, my sister still held her necklace, but the way she gripped it now, clutching it to her chest like a lifeline, betrayed the cracks in her perfect smile. Her admirers had turned their attention away. Cameras no longer flashed in her direction. Every lens, every whisper, every curious glance had been stolen from her and redirected to me. My mother was the first to recover. She rose from her chair, her features arranged into a brittle smile that fooled no one. "What a surprise," she said, her voice strained yet commanding, attempting to control the narrative. "How thoughtful of your grandfather." She didn't look at me as she spoke, but at the guests, as though trying to regain their approval. But people weren't looking at her anymore. Their eyes remained on me, their expressions a blend of awe and intrigue. The social balance my parents had cultivated for years, where my sister was the star and I was the backdrop, had shifted in one undeniable moment. My father cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "We should continue with the evening. It is, after all, about celebrating the marriage." His attempt at redirecting fell flat. No one moved, no one resumed eating or chatting. The air was thick with curiosity. The jeweler bowed slightly toward me before stepping back. He had done what he came for. His exit was quiet, but it left behind an earthquake. I could still feel the weight of his words, each one etched into the stunned silence. She is the true heir. I took my seat again, my husband placing a hand on my back this time. I didn't pull away. The warmth of his touch steadied me. He leaned close, whispering so only I could hear. "You know this changes everything." His tone wasn't fearful. It was protective, laced with something I hadn't expected. Pride. Across from me, my sister leaned toward my mother, her voice sharp though hushed. "How could you not know about this? You let me stand here like a fool." The venom in her words made her sound like a stranger. My mother's hand brushed hers in warning, signaling her to quiet, but her eyes betrayed panic. The crowd had begun murmuring again, low conversations slipping across tables. Some guests smiled at me warmly, eager to be seen on the right side of the story. Others whispered behind their hands, watching my parents with barely veiled amusement. A scandal unfolding on a wedding night was entertainment they hadn't paid for, yet they relished it all the same. Dinner plates cooled untouched. The violinists faltered, their notes uncertain, as if even music couldn't mask the fracture that had split the evening in two. I sat upright, crown in place, and let it unfold. For once, I wasn't scrambling to shrink myself to fit into their version of who I should be. When dessert was brought out, the weight of conversation finally tilted back toward me. A guest at the far end of the table, a man known for his ruthless business deals, raised his glass in my direction. "To the bride," he said, his voice booming. "To her strength, her inheritance, and her future." The toast sparked applause again, this time more deliberate, less spontaneous, but it carried weight. My parents sat frozen, their expressions locked in forced composure. My sister kept her eyes down, jaw tight. I thanked the man with a steady nod, though my heart raced. Each toast, each glance, each word reminded me that my position had shifted. No one would ever see me the same way again. After the meal, I slipped away from the main hall under the guise of needing air. My husband followed, his steps quiet but determined. We stepped onto the balcony overlooking the garden, the air crisp against my flushed skin. He turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "Are you all right?" he asked. I laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. I don't even know what I am right now. Shocked, angry, relieved, maybe all of it. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said firmly. "Not anymore." The sincerity in his words steadied me, yet I knew he couldn't fully grasp the depth of what had shifted. This wasn't just a gift. This was my grandfather rewriting the story my parents had tried to bury me under. From the balcony, I could see guests moving through the hall like restless birds, their faces glowing with speculation. My parents remained inside, cornered by a small group demanding answers. My sister was nowhere in sight. I returned to the hall after a few minutes, aware that retreating too long would look like weakness. If my parents had taught me anything, it was that appearances mattered. The second I stepped back in, the crowd parted slightly, attention turning once again. My mother reached for me, her fingers brushing my arm. "Darling," she said, voice sweet but strained, "you must understand. This is all so unexpected. Surely you'll allow us to explain later." I met her gaze, the weight of years pressing between us. "There's nothing for you to explain," I said evenly. Grandfather made his intentions clear. Her smile faltered, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. My father joined in, his tone sharper. "Don't let this spectacle overshadow the family. You should think carefully about how you handle it." The warning was clear, but I wasn't afraid. For the first time, their control felt fragile. The crown on my head wasn't just metal and stone. It was leverage, a truth they could no longer deny. Guests lingered longer than they should have, unwilling to leave while the tension simmered. Every laugh, every whisper carried an edge. My sister finally reappeared near the end of the night, her face carefully composed, her necklace gleaming but hollow against her skin. She avoided me, staying close to friends who looked less like companions and more like a shield. As the evening wound down, I felt the shift in the air settle into something permanent. The tiara had redrawn the lines of power in my family. My parents no longer held the same command. My sister no longer stood untouchable, and I no longer carried the weight of invisibility. But beneath the triumph, I knew this wasn't over. A crown doesn't erase resentment. It breeds it. The looks exchanged between my parents and my sister told me as much. They weren't done. They would regroup, strategize, and find new ways to remind me that in their eyes, I was never meant to be chosen. As the last of the guests trickled out and the hall dimmed, I caught my reflection in the tall windows. The tiara shimmered back at me, its diamonds unyielding. For years, I had wondered what it would feel like to be seen, to matter. Now I knew, and with that knowledge came a dangerous clarity. They wouldn't forgive this, and they certainly wouldn't forget it. The reception hall had emptied, leaving behind only echoes of footsteps and the faint scent of flowers wilting in tall vases. Staff moved quietly, clearing plates and folding chairs with downcast eyes, aware they had witnessed something far larger than a wedding. The tiara still sat on my head, its weight a constant reminder of the shift that had taken place. My grandfather's crown had changed me in the eyes of every guest who left that night whispering. But the real storm was still waiting. As my husband gathered a few belongings from the table, I noticed my parents speaking with the event coordinator near the stage. Their voices were low but urgent, their movements tight. My sister stood slightly apart, her arms crossed, eyes flicking toward me like daggers. She hadn't spoken to me all evening, but her silence was louder than any insult she had ever thrown. When the last of the guests finally disappeared through the doors, my mother approached me. Her smile was gone, replaced with something sharp and brittle. "We need to talk," she said. I glanced at my husband, whose jaw tensed at her tone. He opened his mouth to protest, but I shook my head. "Where?" I asked. "Upstairs," my father answered flatly, gesturing toward a private suite reserved for the family. His voice left no room for refusal. The four of us walked through the empty hall in silence. The sound of my heels against the floor echoed like gunshots in the quiet space. My husband followed at my side, his hand brushing mine in a silent vow not to leave me alone with them. When we reached the suite, my father closed the door with deliberate force. The air inside was heavy, charged with tension. My sister was the first to speak, her voice breaking the silence. "Do you have any idea what you did tonight?" she snapped, her arms still crossed. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. Do you think anyone is going to remember my necklace after what that jeweler said? No, they'll only remember you and your little crown." I met her glare without flinching. "It wasn't my doing. Grandfather arranged it." "That's convenient," she spat. "You just sat there while he turned the entire room into your stage. You loved it." Before I could answer, my mother stepped between us. Her voice was low, controlled. "This isn't about your sister's necklace. This is about how we are now being viewed. Do you understand what you've done? You've shifted the balance of this family without asking a single question." I laughed bitterly. "Without asking? As though I had any say in it? He made his choice years ago. You're just angry you couldn't stop it." My father's voice cut through, deeper and harsher. "Enough. You need to listen. That tiara doesn't just symbolize some sentimental gift. It represents property, assets, influence, things you have no idea how to manage. You could destroy everything with a single mistake." My husband finally spoke, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Maybe you should give her some credit. She's not a child. If her grandfather trusted her with it, maybe you should too." My father turned to him, eyes narrowing. "This is a family matter. Stay out of it." "No," my husband replied firmly. "She is my wife. That means this is my concern." The tension snapped tighter. My mother's eyes narrowed, her composure slipping. "Do you think marriage makes you her shield? You don't understand the weight of what's been placed in her hands." "I understand enough," he said, stepping closer to me. "And I won't let you twist this into something ugly." My sister scoffed. "Of course you defend her. You're probably already imagining what you'll do with all those properties and accounts. You married into a fortune you didn't expect. I turned on her, my patience thinning. You think this is about money? That's all you see? Grandfather left me more than wealth. He left me recognition, something you and our parents never gave me. Her face flushed red. Don't make yourself out to be some victim. You've always been jealous of me. Jealous. I repeated, the word sharp on my tongue. Do you know what it's like to watch your own family applaud you only when you fail? To sit through years of being overlooked, dismissed, treated like background noise? You wore the necklace tonight, and the room admired you. But when that tiara appeared, when grandfather's words were read aloud, you finally understood what it feels like to be invisible. That's been my life for years. Her mouth opened, but no words came. For once, she had nothing to throw back. My mother placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her before turning back to me. You are walking into something you don't understand. There are people who will expect you to live up to that title. They will watch you closely, waiting for you to falter. If you think that crown will make your life easier, you're wrong. It will bury you if you're not careful. Her words weren't entirely wrong, but the warning wasn't born out of concern. It was fear that their control over me was slipping. I'd rather be buried under the weight of truth than suffocate under your silence, I said evenly. My father's fists clenched at his sides. You will regret defying us. No, I replied, my voice steady. I regret ever letting you convince me I wasn't worth anything. That ends tonight. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with unspoken threats. My sister's eyes glistened with rage she couldn't mask. My mother's face was a mask of composure, though her jaw tightened with every word she swallowed. My father's stare was cold, promising retribution. Finally, my mother broke the silence. Very well. You've made your choice. But don't expect us to clean up the mess when people begin asking questions. I tilted my head, the tiara gleaming under the sweet, soft light. They won't be asking you anything. They'll be asking me. Her eyes hardened. She turned to my sister. We're leaving. My father opened the door without another word, his steps heavy as he strode into the hall. My sister lingered a moment longer, her gaze locked on mine. There was no trace of sisterly warmth, no bond of shared history, only bitterness. She whispered as she brushed past me. Enjoy it while it lasts. The door closed behind them with a finality that echoed louder than the applause had earlier. I stood in the quiet room, my husband beside me. He touched my shoulder gently. They won't let this go. I know, I said softly, but neither will I. We sat in silence for a while, the hum of distant voices from staff carrying faintly through the walls. I thought of my grandfather, of the way he had seen me in ways no one else had. His letter had not been just a gift. It was a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. He had given me more than a crown. He had given me a weapon. By dawn, the story had already left the hall and slipped into the city. Secrets don't stay hidden when diamonds and power are involved. My wedding wasn't remembered for the vows or the cake. It was remembered for the tiara, the envelope, and the silence of my parents as the jeweler revealed a truth they had spent years burying. I woke with the sun flooding through the curtains of the suite, my head heavy not from exhaustion but from the weight of what had unfolded. My husband was still asleep, his arm draped loosely across me. The tiara sat on the dresser, its stones catching the morning light like a quiet sentinel. For a moment, I just stared at it. The object wasn't just a crown. It was a mirror reflecting everything my parents had denied me: respect, acknowledgement, inheritance. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling me from my thoughts. Notifications poured in, missed calls, messages, alerts. My name was everywhere. Headlines blared across screens. Bride crowned true heir on wedding night. Family secrets exposed in spectacular reception. Photos of me wearing the tiara had gone viral, my mother's pale expression frozen beside me in countless shots. My sister's forced smile was being dissected by strangers who didn't even know her name. I scrolled slowly, absorbing the whirlwind. Some commentators praised me as a figure of strength, Others speculated on the fortune behind the jewels, and a few whispered about the coldness of my parents. What none of them realized was that they were seeing the cracks my grandfather had predicted. My husband stirred awake, blinking at the light before focusing on me. "It started, hasn't it?" he asked, his voice groggy but certain. "Yes," I said, handing him the phone. "And it's bigger than I imagined." He scrolled briefly before setting it down. "You have a choice. You can hide from it, or you can own it." There was no real choice. Hiding had been my life until now. Owning it was the only path forward. By mid-morning, calls from relatives began pouring in. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly remembered my number. Aunts who had always favored my sister now spoke with cautious politeness. Everyone wanted to align themselves with whoever held the power. For the first time, that was me. But not all voices were congratulatory. One uncle, who had long benefited from my father's business connections, called with veiled irritation. "You must understand," he said, "this has created waves that will be hard to calm. Your parents have always carried the family's image. You've blindsided them." "I didn't blindside anyone," I replied. "Grandfather made the decision years ago. If they were embarrassed, it's because they tried to hide it." He muttered something about reckless timing before hanging up. The message was clear. My parents were already moving to frame me as the disruptor, the ungrateful daughter tearing the family fabric. By the afternoon, I knew I couldn't sit quietly. If I didn't take control of the narrative, they would. I called a trusted family friend, one of the few who had ever shown me kindness without strings attached. She had connections to the press and knew how quickly stories could be spun. "I don't want to smear anyone," I told her, "but I won't let them erase what happened." She agreed to arrange a quiet interview, not one of those flashy spectacles, but a controlled conversation that allowed me to tell my side without theatrics. It was scheduled for 2 days later. Until then, I had to hold steady. My parents, however, weren't waiting. By evening, whispers reached me through acquaintances. At a luncheon, my mother had dismissed the tiara as an old trinket with sentimental value. My father had implied that the documents were symbolic, not binding. They were already planting doubt, attempting to shrink what my grandfather had given me into something ornamental, meaningless. I refused to let them succeed. That night, I retrieved the envelope again. The deeds, the accounts, the investments, they were real, stamped, sealed, legally airtight. My parents could spin stories, but they couldn't erase signatures. My sister, however, posed a different threat. Her weapon wasn't logic, it was charm. People adored her, forgave her flaws, excused her arrogance because she sparkled in every room. And now, stripped of her spotlight, she was dangerous. The next day proved it. Photos surfaced of her at a charity event, necklace gleaming, smile radiant. The captions framed her as the overlooked sibling, the one who had been upstaged by a dramatic reveal. She played the role perfectly, graceful, gracious, the victim of circumstances beyond her control. Public sympathy shifted toward her quickly, the press painting her as a young woman unfairly overshadowed on a night that should have been about family unity. I watched the coverage, fury simmering beneath my calm expression. She was rewriting the story even as it unfolded, turning her humiliation into pity. If I didn't act, the crown would become a scandal rather than a triumph. My husband watched me pacing the room. "You can't let her control the narrative," he said. "I won't," I replied. "But I need to be careful. If I come out swinging, they'll paint me as vindictive. I need to be precise." The interview was my chance. 2 days later, I sat across from a journalist in a quiet studio. The lights were soft, the atmosphere intimate. She asked about the wedding, about the jeweler, about the tiara. I answered with honesty, but without theatrics. "My grandfather wanted me to have this," I said simply. He made it clear. It wasn't about wealth, it was about recognition. For years, I felt invisible in my own family. This was his way of reminding me that I was seen. When she asked about my parents, I didn't attack. I spoke of differences, of misunderstandings, but never hatred. My restraint was deliberate. I knew viewers would fill in the blanks themselves. The more measured I appeared, the harsher my parents' attempts to discredit me would look. The interview aired that evening. By nightfall, social media lit up again. Strangers praised my composure. Commentators analyzed every word. The consensus was clear. I wasn't a spoiled child flaunting jewels. I was a woman carrying the legacy her grandfather intended. My parents didn't respond publicly that night, but I knew they were seething. My sister, however, couldn't resist. She posted a photo of herself holding a glass, captioned with a single line, "Some crowns are heavier than they look." The comments poured in, half praising her elegance, half accusing her of bitterness. The divide grew sharper. The next morning, I received a call from the jeweler himself. His voice was calm but urgent. "Be careful," he said. "Your grandfather trusted me because he knew I would honor his wishes, no matter what your family said. But others, they will try to challenge this. That tiara isn't just jewelry. It symbolizes authority. People covet authority more than diamonds." I thanked him, though the unease in my chest grew heavier. By the end of the week, I learned what he meant. Lawyers contacted me on behalf of my parents, questioning the validity of the trust fund documents. They weren't contesting ownership outright, not yet, but they were probing, looking for cracks. My husband and I sat in the living room, papers spread across the table. "They're testing you," he said. "If you back down even once, they'll take everything." "I won't," I replied, though my hands trembled slightly. "This is bigger than property. It's about not letting them erase me again." We worked late into the night, contacting legal advisors, preparing responses. Every move felt like a chess game where one wrong step could cost me everything. The following weekend brought another blow. My sister hosted a lavish dinner, inviting half the city's elite. Photos flooded online, her laughing, toasting, surrounded by admirers. The necklace gleamed around her neck in every shot, positioned like a counter to my tiara. She was reminding the world that she still had influence, that she wasn't going to fade quietly. But buried among the glossy images was one detail she hadn't controlled. A photo captured her mid-conversation, her smile tight, her eyes cold. The caption beneath it read, "The younger sister left in the shadows." For the first time, the cracks in her facade were visible to everyone. The week after the interview, calm was only an illusion. My husband and I carried on with our routines, answering messages, speaking cautiously to those who reached out, but underneath the surface, the pressure built. The city had taken sides. Half of society praised me as a woman stepping into her rightful place, while the other half whispered that I had torn my family apart on my wedding day. It was late one evening when the first blow arrived. A courier delivered a thick envelope to our doorstep. Inside was a formal notice. My parents were contesting parts of the inheritance, claiming irregularities in the documents my grandfather had left. They argued he hadn't been of sound mind when he signed, suggesting manipulation, though they offered no proof. It was the first official step in what I knew would become a battle played out both in court and in public. I read the notice slowly, my hands tightening with every line. My husband took it from me when I finished, his expression darkening. "They've been waiting for the right moment," he said. "They want to undermine you before you can solidify your position." I nodded, though my stomach nodded. They don't care about the money. This is about control. If they can strip me of legitimacy, everything grandfather planned dies with it. The next morning, headlines exploded again. Stories about the contestation spread like wildfire. Family rift deepens. Parents challenge bride's inheritance. Analysts speculated about the trust fund, debating whether it would hold up legally. My parents, of course, made themselves available to comment. My mother appeared on a talk show, her voice smooth, her tone sorrowful. "We only want what's fair," she said. "This isn't about hurting our daughter. It's about ensuring our father's wishes were properly understood. He was a complicated man, and sometimes his intentions were misread." Her performance was flawless, dripping with grace and sorrow. Anyone who didn't know her would have believed every word. My father gave a statement outside his office, his voice firm but calm. "We will let the courts decide. This is not personal. It is about protecting family legacy." But it was personal. It always had been. The calls flooded in again. Reporters wanted my response. Friends wanted to know if it was true. Acquaintances sent messages pretending to be supportive while fishing for details. I stayed quiet at first, knowing that rushing out with anger would only play into their hands. Silence was harder, though. It made me look weak, and my sister used that vacuum with precision. She appeared at another charity event, tears glistening as she spoke to a journalist who just happened to be present. "It's been very hard," she said softly. "I love my sister, but I worry she's being misled. This fight is tearing us apart. I just want peace." The footage spread everywhere, and with it came a flood of sympathy for her. People wrote about her strength, her grace under pressure, her willingness to forgive. The necklace glittered in every frame, a symbol she wielded as if it were a crown of her own. Watching her performance made my blood run cold. She wasn't just surviving this. She was twisting it, pulling the public closer to her side, painting herself as the wounded sibling. If my parents had launched the legal attack, she was launching the emotional one. I met with my lawyer the next day, a man recommended by the jeweler himself. He was sharp, calculating, with no patience for theatrics. He reviewed the documents and looked up at me. "They don't have a case. The trust fund is airtight. The property deeds are properly signed and witnessed. They're hoping to drag this out, to make you look unstable under pressure. The danger isn't losing the assets, it's losing the narrative." "I can't let them win that," I said firmly. "Then you have to fight it on two fronts. We'll handle the court. You handle the stage." The stage meant the public eye. Every move I made from then on would be scrutinized, dissected, spun. If I appeared arrogant, I'd be labeled greedy. If I appeared timid, I'd be painted as weak. The balance was razor-thin. That night, my husband and I sat at the kitchen table, documents spread before us. He reached across the table, his hand steady on mine. "They're trying to make you feel small again. Don't let them. This isn't the girl they used to dismiss. This is you, the woman who stood in front of hundreds and put on that crown without trembling." His words steadied me, but the weight was still immense. Every shadow in the room felt like a reminder of how far they would go to strip me down. The following week, we attended a gala we had been invited to long before the wedding. I debated skipping it, but in the end, I knew showing up was crucial. Absence would look like defeat. When we arrived, the room buzzed instantly. Conversations faltered, eyes turned, and cameras shifted in my direction. I wore a simple gown, elegant but understated, letting the tiara speak for itself. My husband stayed close, his presence solid at my side. My parents were there too, arriving in a wave of flashing lights and orchestrated smiles. My mother wore pearls, my father a tailored suit, both radiating the image of dignity. My sister arrived later, sweeping into the room as though she owned it, laughter bubbling around her like perfume. She spotted me across the hall, and our eyes locked. Her smile widened, but her eyes held no warmth. Throughout the evening, conversations circled us like vultures. People asked subtle questions, pretending to be curious about my honeymoon plans while probing for details about the legal fight. I answered politely, never giving them what they wanted. At one point, my sister approached, glass in hand, expression calm. "You look lovely tonight," she said smoothly. "And you look practiced," I replied. Her smile didn't falter. "You've made quite the impression." But impressions fade. People want consistency. Can you give them that? "Can you?" I asked. Her smile slipped, just for a second, before she recovered. "Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts," she whispered, then drifted away into the crowd. The tension in that room was a silent war. Every handshake, every glance, every word carried double meanings. By the time we left, I knew one thing for certain. This battle wasn't about documents anymore. It was about survival in a world where perception held as much weight as law. Days turned into weeks, each one heavier than the last. The case moved slowly, deliberately dragged out by my parents' attorneys. Their strategy was clear: stall, delay, pressure. Meanwhile, my sister continued her campaign, appearing in magazines, attending events, always positioning herself as the gracious daughter caught in the crossfire. I responded with caution, choosing my appearances carefully. I focused on substance, visiting one of the properties my grandfather had left, speaking with staff there, ensuring they knew I intended to honor his legacy. Photos circulated of me walking the grounds, listening intently, showing responsibility rather than glamour. The contrast was deliberate. While my sister sparkled, I stood steady. And slowly, the tide began to shift. Commentators noted the difference. One daughter chasing cameras, the other quietly proving herself. But my parents weren't finished. They arranged a press conference, standing together with my sister at their side. My mother spoke first, her voice steady. "This is not a fight we wanted. We love our daughter, but we believe mistakes were made in how our father's estate was distributed. We will continue to seek clarity, not for ourselves, but for the family as a whole." My sister added softly, "I just want us to find peace again." The performance was flawless. The sympathy swelled in their favor once more. And that night, I received another envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note from my mother. "If you continue this fight, you will destroy everything." I stared at the note for a long time. My husband read it over my shoulder, then crumpled it in his hand. "They're trying to scare you," he said. "They don't scare me," I answered. "They never will again." The morning of the hearing, the city seemed to hold its breath. The courthouse steps were lined with cameras, microphones raised high as if waiting to capture blood spilled on marble. Reporters swarmed the sidewalks, shouting my name the moment our car pulled up. My husband gripped my hand firmly as we stepped out together, his presence steady beside me. The flashbulbs went off in a storm. Questions pierced the air. Did your grandfather really intend to leave everything to you? Are you worried your family is proof? Do you regret what you said about them? I said nothing. Words before the hearing would only be twisted. Silence carried its own power, and as I walked up the steps, the weight of the tiara case in my bag reminded me of the promise I had to keep, not to falter, not to bend. Inside, the atmosphere was heavier. The courtroom buzzed with hushed whispers as spectators filled the benches. My parents sat at the opposite table, my sister between them, her expression composed, almost angelic. She glanced toward me briefly, a flicker of triumph in her eyes, then turned away as though I were beneath her notice. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and the proceedings began. My parents' lawyer rose first, his tone measured, his voice calm. He spoke of confusion, of an elderly man perhaps not fully in command of his faculties when he made such sweeping decisions. He suggested coercion, subtle manipulation, a granddaughter placed above all others unfairly. As he spoke, my parents sat still, their faces masks of sorrow and dignity. My sister lowered her gaze, embodying grief and loyalty. To the untrained eye, they looked like the wronged ones, the family betrayed by an opportunistic child. When it was our turn, my lawyer stood without theatrics. He laid out the documents plainly one by one. The trust fund papers with my grandfather's signature. The property deeds, signed and notarized. The instructions to the jeweler, dated years before his passing. Each piece built upon the last, a wall too solid to be shaken by suggestion alone. But my parents' side wasn't finished. They called witnesses, an old family acquaintance who claimed my grandfather had sometimes repeated himself, a doctor who admitted under cross-examination that while my grandfather had been elderly, he had been fully capable of making decisions. The performance was meant to plant doubt, to make the air uncertain. Then came the turn no one expected. My sister asked to speak. Permission was granted, and she walked to the stand gracefully, her hands folded in front of her. Her voice was soft, trembling at first. "I loved my grandfather dearly," she began. But in his final years, he was confused. He often forgot things, repeated stories, sometimes didn't recognize people. I don't say this to dishonor him, but to explain that perhaps decisions were made when he wasn't fully himself. Her eyes glistened. Her voice broke just enough to seem real. I worry my sister didn't understand that. I think she believed he wanted this, but I can't be sure he was truly aware of the choices he was making. Her testimony landed like a stone in water, rippling across the room. Some spectators nodded, murmuring softly. To them, She looked genuine, a younger sister trying to protect the truth without malice. My chest tightened, anger pressing against my ribs, but my lawyer touched my arm, warning me to stay silent. We had our turn still. When I was called, I walked to the stand with steady steps. The room quieted. My parents' eyes followed me, sharp and calculating, my sister's soft and pleading. I sat, placed my hands in my lap, and looked directly at the judge. My grandfather was many things, I said, voice steady, but he was never confused about me. He told me stories every day about responsibility, about carrying forward what he built. He wasn't a man who stumbled into decisions. He was deliberate, careful, and exact. I paused, then continued. This wasn't about property. It wasn't about wealth. It was about trust. He saw me for who I am, not who others pretended to be. He knew the faces behind the smiles, the games behind the kindness. And he made his choice with full awareness. To suggest otherwise isn't only wrong, it's insulting to his memory. The courtroom hung on the silence that followed. Then my lawyer produced one final piece of evidence, the sealed letter from my grandfather that had been given with the tiara. Until that moment, we had kept it private, but now it was time. He read it aloud, the words echoing through the chamber. To my granddaughter, I know the others will try to take what is yours. Do not let them. This crown is yours because you are the only one who understands the weight of it. You will not be loved for it, but you will be respected. And respect lasts longer than affection built on lies. The impact was immediate. The words cut through every argument, every pretense, every carefully orchestrated smile. The spectators stirred, whispers rising. My parents' lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. I looked across the courtroom then, straight at my parents. My mother's face had paled, her lips pressed into a thin line. My father's jaw tightened, the mask of dignity cracking. My sister's eyes flickered with something raw, rage, maybe, or fear. The judge called a recess, and the room erupted in noise. Reporters rushed out to deliver the words that would dominate headlines by evening. The grandfather's letter, the crown meant only for me, the trust unshaken. In the hallway, I stood with my husband, cameras flashing around us. My sister approached, her expression different now. No softness, no tears, just venom hidden behind a polite smile. You think this is over? She whispered. You think a letter makes you untouchable? People can be swayed, but they can also be turned. Don't underestimate me. I met her gaze without flinching. You already underestimated me. That's why you're losing. She didn't answer. She simply turned and walked back to our parents, who gathered around her like generals regrouping after a lost battle. The final ruling didn't come that day, but it didn't need to. The tide had shifted. The trust stood firm, the property mine, the crown unchallenged. The letter had been my grandfather's last move, one they hadn't anticipated, and it shattered their foundation. Outside, the city roared with the news. Commentators spoke not of confusion or manipulation anymore, but of betrayal, of parents who had tried to strip their daughter of what was rightfully hers. Sympathy shifted, and for the first time, I wasn't the outsider. I was the one who had endured, the one who stood firm. That night, back home, I placed the tiara on my head once more. My husband stood behind me, his hands on my shoulders, his reflection steady in the mirror. They can't touch you now, he said softly. They'll try, I answered. They always will, but it doesn't matter anymore. I don't need their approval. I never did. I looked at my reflection, the crown glinting in the light. It wasn't about jewels or property, or even the applause that had once felt so foreign. It was about knowing, at last, that I was never the forgotten daughter. I was the heir,